And I want to thank all of our panelists here for lending their time and being a part of this to help the community. So thank you to everybody for your time. So without much further ado, I will let the panelists all briefly introduce themselves. Feel free to introduce however you feel most comfortable, but would love to kind of hear a bit about, what you've been doing in the past, what you might be doing next. Yeah, and where you're calling from, of course. I always think that's very interesting. So we'll just go down the line here. So Elisabeth, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Hey, so I'm Elisabeth Hendrickson. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was previously with Pivotal. I am not anymore. Pivotal was acquired by VMware back at the end of December of last year. I'm currently on hiatus, and I was super excited to participate in this panel. Although I am not currently having to struggle with doing my job remotely, I worked for a couple of years remotely while my husband was getting his MBA, and we had our very young daughter, and I pretty much spent 2 years looking at the same four walls because we were in a fairly small space. And so I can super sympathize with anybody who is suddenly finding themselves working from home or trying to manage people who are working from home.
Excellent, thank you. And Johnny, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Johnny Borsico. I am currently an SRE at Heroku, which is actually owned by Salesforce. Some folks know that, some folks don't. So the thing about sort of a Heroku specifically is that it's always had a sort of a remote culture. So when I joined the team, I was basically I joined as a remote worker, and basically we have headquarters in San Francisco and whatnot. I'm actually based out of Ellicott City, Maryland, and so that to me, sort of working remote has always been sort of normal. I've been a remote worker for other companies as well for over the last 5 or 6 years, so it's been natural for me. But I think this whole situation that we're all in has really drastically shifted what it means to be like a remote worker. And I know even with my experience as a remote worker, my life now is very, very different from what it was pre-pandemic. So we're going to get into that a lot more, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context for so where I'm coming from, my experience with remote, and pretty much how that plays out now.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Johnny. And Paolo.
Hi. First, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So I'm Paulo Moncores. I'm originally from Brazil. The last 4 years I was living in Germany. I worked at Wayfair as Associate Director of Engineering. So I had some teams in Berlin, some teams in Boston. So I had some contact with remote teams, and also with a big difference in terms of time zone, 6 hours. So it was a challenge when I was having my dinner. Actually, they were in the afternoon making very important decisions. So definitely was a little bit challenged. Right now, I'm working as a senior manager at Shopify. I am based in Waterloo, Canada. And definitely Shopify was operating like some teams were working remotely, but the R&D organization, right, product UX engineering, we had some teams remote, but right now we are 100% remotely. So it's been the last 6 weeks, and this new normal world definitely is the challenge. I don't think it's just the challenging about working remotely. It is the challenge of working remotely with the world in a very different state. So I am looking forward to our discussions today. We have been learning a lot these last weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really interested to dig into some more detail on that. And next up, and I can't see actually from my view if everyone has joined, but Jason, if you're on there, which I think you are, would love for you to introduce yourself. See, it looks like Jason wasn't able to join. I know he mentioned he's got childcare duties this morning, so he might be late. We'll move next. Albert, I can see you there. So I'll get you to introduce yourself. Thanks for joining all the way from Finland today.
Thank you, Max, for inviting me. Really excited of the discussion today. I'm a CTO and co-founder of Meru Health. We are a digital clinic for greater mental health, and we are treating patients in the United States primarily. However, we have a remote team doing development in Finland, Helsinki, Finland. And so in my role, I actually get to travel a lot, and I spent on average about half my time in the United States in San Francisco. And during that time, we have a 10-hour time difference with my team here. So it's a bit of a challenge. However, we are tackling it well, and our organization overall is remote first also. So everything happens in such a way that anyone can completely work remotely comfortably without changing any of the team's processes. So, so this is remote work is pretty much ingrained in what we do. However, our actual R&D team is based locally in Helsinki, and we try to keep it that way, at least for the foreseeable future.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks all of you for joining us, and I'm excited to jump into it. So, as discussed, we'll kind of keep ourselves on topic just to kind of get through some interesting ideas. But let's keep it conversational. I'm really excited to kind of hear everybody's experiences and thoughts kind of as we move through some of these topics. So for the audience, the kind of key topics we'll be covering, or at least building our framework around today. We'll be examining what it looks like to be thinking about the right kind of traits or processes or ideas or personalities to be recruiting for, and to be kind of encouraging or teaching or training to make sure that you're building teams that can work really well in a remote dynamic. Next, we'll be discussing some of the challenges of building a remote culture that is effective, that's collaborative, that has a rapport, finding opportunities, whether through leadership, through different tools, to foster real collaboration and productive organizations. We'll also be talking about a topic that I think is challenging for most people, but is so under discussed, which is when you're working from home, how do you manage that with your family and your children or your roommates? A challenge I've heard many people talk about, and I had a great discussion with Johnny talking about exactly this, and excited to jump into that. And then last and not least, we'll talk a little bit about how people can think about avoiding the challenges and the burnout of remote work. Certainly a common misconception being that remote work makes life a little easier, or perhaps means you work a bit less. And I think many of us have probably seen that experience where the 9 to 5 becomes a 24/7 job in some ways. So we'll talk about that. So let's jump straight into it. And I'm gonna ask first, Johnny, actually, if you're up for kicking us off here, because I think it's something you have some unique insights on, given our conversations on remote first versus remote retrofit. But what has your experience been like in terms of seeing, what kind of traits or personalities work really well, which don't, and how as an individual or as a leader, have you found, kind of honing those things in to make this a more productive and effective thing?
Right. So the first thing I think we're a lot of us are coming into the realization now is that a lot of folks that used to go into the office, you develop a certain mindset, a certain workflow, a certain sort of a set of habits that are sort of conducing to going into work, having a commute, and all these things, sort of seeing others and interacting with others in the physical world, right? So because we're now sort of all remote, right? Your routine, the things you do every day, how you do them, when you do them, everything sort of shifted. So if you don't, you almost have to sort of take. At this point, I think we've all heard that, okay, you have to sort of change your mindset to basically be a remote worker, in a sense that the whole remote first company style of operating is something that basically those who have been remote first, as I mentioned, Heroku has always been sort of a remote distributed team. So the sort of the things you do on your day to day, right? You kind of have to retrain yourself if you're not used to working that way. In a remote world, you're all about sort of it's better to over communicate than under communicate, right? It's better to sort of, even if you have people sitting around you in the office, in a remote first sort of company, everything's happening through chat or through a virtual meeting, thereby allowing those who are not perhaps near you to sort of also partake, right? So if you were in a remote first a company or distributed team, you already have basically you have been exercising these muscles. But if you transition from the physical workplace, right, and the routines associated with that to now be trying to do remote, you kind of have to train yourself, and the burden for you is that much higher. But again, the key factor is here being that, okay, you understand that it's better to over communicate sometimes than it is to under communicate, as you might perhaps do in the physical setting.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I'm interested for all of your thoughts. It's been at least my personal experience, having been an entrepreneur in my past life. I think there's an element of remote success that requires you to kind of either develop or screen for kind of self-starter behaviors, and that can be a big challenge. And I'm curious for your guys' experiences, whether on a personal level, kind of habits you've built or kind of things that you've looked to cut out of your life or further refine. What have you found to be the kind of ingredients for success and kind of getting that self-structured, self-motivated, effective communication? Curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I think we need to be much more intentional about things that when we are in an office, we don't need to be. So for example, I like to have a routine to start my work. I think this is important. I don't like, okay, it's because I'm working from home, I will just wake up 5 minutes before I start working. Actually having a routine that actually you can start, your body is ready to work. I think it's very important. During the work, my day, it's about doing meetings, right? As most of the managers, what most like to do is meetings, right? But it's very easy when we are working remotely. You don't have breaks. You are just changing rooms all the time. So having proper time to have breaks, have a proper time to drink water, having proper time, like every 1 hour, take 10 minutes to do nothing, just to refresh yourself. I think it's important. And I think for me, one of the most important things, it was, we always have a ritual before we start working, but we never have a ritual when we are finishing work. Because before I was just driving to my house or walking to my house. So I think this was the way that I was decompressing from the stress of the work. But now that we are working from home, it's like I just turn off the computer and I go for my family with the entire stress that I have in my normal day. What it's not good. So having also a ritual for you to do the transition from your house, inside of your house, to your family, I think this is very important. Being very intentional about that. This also helps you to have a very good dynamic at your house.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's a really great point you raised, Paolo, that we can kind of pivot the discussion into, which is kind of any kind of personal routines or rituals for success. And I think that's certainly been a big challenge with coronavirus in particular. It's a lot of these little rituals that we might have had previously are either much less accessible or perhaps gone completely. One of the things, in my personal life that I always found really productive was, I would try and start my day a little earlier by walking to the local coffee shop. Gets me some fresh air, gets me moving. I go and check my emails while I'm sitting in the coffee shop to kind of get myself grounded, get my day started. And that created a bit of separation between, my home office, and my kind of waking up and getting showered and dressed part of my day. So yeah, curious to hear from you guys. What does the start of your day look like, or what have you found is a good way to kind of get yourself booted up? And I think Paolo brings up a really great point, which is how do you end your day, and have you found effective approaches to that?
Well, I can start. For example, the coronavirus time has changed the requirements of the team of having to be present at the office at a certain hour, or perhaps having meetings there. So what I try to do, for example, for myself, I changed the way how I wake up. So actually, I don't set up an alarm clock anymore, and I just wake up when I feel like it. And it doesn't mean that I actually wake up really late, but what it allows me to do is to actually get the rest my body needs and just wake up when it feels like being ready to start working. So that's sort of one thing that it's maybe not a routine, but it's certainly a behavioral change that I was able to achieve during this time, even when working here with the team.
So I'll say that personally, my habits haven't changed all that much. My boot up routine involves getting myself coffee, which I always made myself anyway, because I'm kind of fussy about my coffee, and spending some time checking news, which these days is incredibly depressing. So I need to limit the amount of time I spend before I try to do something productive checking news. One of my favorite stories, though, that's coming out of coronavirus, one of my friends was telling me that he and his wife now commute together, and they put on their masks, they walk around the block together, and then they both come in and go to work. And I thought that was just absolutely adorable, because not only does it give them time together that's just focused on the two of them, it also does create that buffer between home and work, which is one of those things that's super difficult when your office is your home.
Absolutely. It's a great point.
I have some, if you allow me to jump in here. So I want to tie this into sort of the whole family, how you sort of manage folks around you, right? Kind of thing. So first let me level set. To be a remote worker, even not during this time that we're in, to be a remote worker, there's always been sort of this undercurrent of opinion that basically when you're a remote worker, you have flexibility, yes, but you get to sort of goof off when you want, get to work when you want, do whatever you want, whenever you want, kind of thing. Since I've started working remotely, that's been the furthest thing from the truth that I've ever basically discovered. The amount of discipline that is required when you're a remote worker, to me, sort of way surpasses that of actually going into the office. Now, I'm not saying, those sort of discipline is better than others, et cetera. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that in order to actually get through the day, right? Because there are so much distraction that can just pop in. You have to work, interact with your coworkers via chat. You have to get into meetings. You have to do this. So our idea of contributing back to our employer or to our businesses or to whatever the case may be, we're not paid to be on meetings or to chat, and we're paid to provide value, right? So how do you find the time during the day to provide that value? How do you get the deep focus time, right, to actually do that work? And I have a wife and kids. We need an incredible amount of discipline to get through the day. And by that, I mean, we have schedules, right, for everything from the time everybody wakes up to the time they do their quiet times in the morning, come downstairs for breakfast. My wife and I work in shifts. I'll take the morning, I'll get the kids sort of settled. They know when they need to be, doing their remote learning activities. They have built-in breaks during the day when they have playtime, when they need to be doing math, when they need to be doing, games or coding games or whatever the case may be. And we have times in the middle of the day, say, okay, my wife and I switch over, and she starts doing things that way. I can go do my meetings and whatnot. And in the afternoon, again, another sort of scheduled slots in the day to do things. And at the end of the day, the hour comes, we go outside and we do physical activity, right? So, and then we go out, we walk around the block, they're on the bikes, my wife and I are walking. So all these things have to be scheduled. I might be a little unusual because I was, even before this time, I was using a calendar to track every hour of my day. Like I personally need to know where my time goes, right? I hate getting at the end of the day to be like, oh man, like I feel like the only thing I did was attend meetings. Like, what did I do today? Where did the time go, right? I hated that feeling, and I hate it even more now because of all these distractions going on. So I have to plan my day. I plan down to the half hour to know exactly where my time is going. And that is the only thing that has allowed me and my wife really to sort of navigate this time that we're in, because the kids are at home. We have to worry about, as parents, we have to worry about keeping them still educated, to some degree. They can go to school, right? So, and we have to ourselves create time, right, for us to connect and for us to be a family, get around the dinner table and have all these things. And the only way that happens is by having a schedule and having discipline to follow it through.
Johnny, I love what you're saying there. And I remember one of the biggest challenges that I had when my husband was in school and I was actually managing a team remotely was that negotiation with my partner, because, hey, I have a meeting. I can't take our daughter to, at the time taking her to daycare or whatever. Like, can you do that? And that negotiation back and forth and making sure that everybody was aligned. This has got to be so incredibly difficult for anybody who wasn't in the situation before, where they had kids at home and spouse at home and everybody's got the things that they're supposed to be doing. I'm super curious how you manage that negotiation now that you've got so many more moving parts in your family.
Very carefully. No, because it happens, right? I mean, I make it sound sort of, the schedule solves everything, the discipline solves everything. Sometimes, like I'll have days where I have back-to-back meetings and I can't do the morning shift, right? So we'll swap or something like that. So you have to be, it's almost like, I know it's sort of a contradictory, but you have to be flexible with the discipline that you're trying to follow, right? Because you must be somewhat, the day's so structured a particular way, right? But that may mean that sometimes who takes what block of the day to do certain things, right, may shift a little bit, right? Or maybe you move this block that was scheduled to do, a particular activity with the family. Maybe you move that around because today things are just crazy at work, right? So you have to have some flexibility, but you have to stick to that sort of a schedule, to that framework, really, to sort of operate under. The moment everybody starts doing whatever, then things fall apart.
Yeah, and something that I also, I think this is where the companies actually can help, right? I think it's, for us at Shopify, at least, we are saying family first. So doesn't matter what meeting you do have, doesn't matter what needs to happen in the company. If your family needs you, just forget it. We'll find a way, right? So being very flexible, because this I was telling with one of the managers that I work with. It's, my friend, I prefer to have you 2 hours per day that you can focus than having you the entire work day that you can't work. It's because you have to pay attention to your family, and your family is much more important. This is the most important job that you have, being a parent, right? The rest is the rest. We can adapt it, and I think this flexibility. I think the companies now, they definitely can make the difference, right? Making sure that we are creating a safe space for actually people taking time to take care of their families. Like something that I said, like to joke, it's, my friend, I really want you to stay married after COVID. It's not my intention to make your life harder, right? So family first, definitely.
Definitely. No, I think it's an excellent point. And something I think is so important for managers in particular to really take a leadership role on is, and you can manage up or down on this certainly, is making people feel comfortable with having, family intersect with remote life on occasion, particularly during quarantine. Unfortunately, Jason on our panel wasn't able to join this morning. And as I mentioned, I know he's got some kid care duties that are a little challenging right now. And when he emailed me that, I was like, hey, don't worry about it. Absolute worst case, your 3-year-old makes a cameo appearance. We can all kind of laugh about it, and then we can mute you for a few minutes. But I think there's such an importance in making sure to try and remove some of those anxieties or dogmas, wherever you can, and give people a comfort level with that. I saw a tweet the other week that I thought was particularly funny, which was someone saying, stop apologizing for your dog, cat, or toddler appearing in the Zoom meetings. That's all we want to see. It's like,
yeah.
So I think it's such a key point, and I love the way you phrased that, Paolo. It's at the end of the day the most important job any of us have, if we do have spouses or children, and particularly during coronavirus, tensions are higher than they've ever been, and those challenges are important to just recognize as a reality. We can pretend like they don't exist. We can try and act like everything is still normal, or those you are in this perfect vacuum containered office at home, but for most people that's simply not the reality. And I think introducing comfort there is key to the mental health of them.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes and this, it's something that I'm trying to get better every day. It's also like, um, I never saw a company saying, hey, our culture is a crap, please don't come here, we treat people badly. I never saw that. Every company actually have very good positive intents about saying, hey, we care about people, we definitely want to create the best environment for you. But I think now it's time for us to be very concerned about if our speech it's aligned with our actions, right? When we are saying, hey, take time to take care of your family, parenting is the most important thing, but then when the person is back, do you remember that deadline? How this is going? We need this on Friday. This is too important. So I think this is what it's the challenge in terms of if we are looking for launching products, delivering projects, that it's, yes, we are saying that family first, this is too important. So we have to, we will miss deadlines. This is fine. We will have to do replanning. We will not put our folks under pressure and under stress, because I think the road already have a lot of stress. So my case, I have some of the folks here in Canada, the majority, they are foreigners. So I can speak myself, imagine, I am from Brazil. Brazil is struggling a lot. It's struggling a lot. So imagine for me, I cannot leave Canada. If I leave Canada, I cannot be back. So I have to watch this from outside. So I have employees in the same situation. So I think we need to develop more empathy. And okay, this will be delayed. Take our time. This is much important. So I think it's very important for us to make sure that our actions, it's actually aligned with our speech, right? Otherwise, we are not helping anyone. We are creating more pressure and more problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something I would love to kind of discuss as well with all of you. You know, I think we've kind of touched upon some of like the importance of boundaries as well. You know, whether they are kind of, you know, commuting opportunities, whether it's, you know, the home office, you know, whether it's kind of schedule-based boundaries with significant others or roommates. You know, and I see, I think most of us here are zooming in from either a dedicated home office or at least kind of a semi-home office, but interested to kind of hear about, you know, how you guys have found opportunities to create those boundaries, you know, whether it is through a home office, whether it's through configuring your apps or notifications in a certain way, you know, whether it's, you know, mental tactics to kind of unplug or, you know, plug back in or reset. But yeah, Johnny, I hate to pick on you again, but I loved our conversation so much. You know, I would love if you're comfortable kind of kicking this part of our conversation off here.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm fortunate enough to live in a home where I have a dedicated home office. So that was when my wife and I were shopping for a house a few years ago. You know, that was one of the biggest things. You know, that was like number 2 on our list of criteria, right? You know, first, you know, good schools. I think as most people with kids always have as a top criteria for looking for a house. And the second for me really was a dedicated home office, and because even pre-pandemic, I needed sort of this physical space. There's something about sort of a psychological that happens when you get into a space dedicated to work, to getting things done. You immediately, your mindset sort of changes, right? That is, if you train yourself, you know, right. Again, this requires a discipline, and this requires sort of a willingness to sort of treat that space as, okay, when I enter this space here, this is where I get work done. This is where I focus. This is where I do what I need to do to thrive, to take care of my family. So a lot of these things, like we can take too easily for granted sort of the effect that, you know, things and boundaries and sort of even having a room with a door that closes, we take these things for granted. But if you start treating your workspace as sort of sacred, right, as when I enter here, work happens here, right? And then when you go outside, you know, of these boundaries, then you're exposing yourself, right, to interactions with family members or others who live with you or your community. If you like really go outside, so it's a different mindset. The moment I enter into my office, it's like there's a switch that just, it just flips. Now I'm working. When even my kids are like trained now, when they're coming into the office, they'll knock or they'll take a peek to see, how focused I am on what I'm trying to work on, and they don't understand that. Now, I know not everybody has the privilege to have a dedicated home office, especially those who really haven't worked or sort of weren't set up for remote work as we all are now. But I'd say if you can find a spot in your dwelling that you can dedicate to working, right? And make sure you consistently go back to that, because what you're gonna do is you're gonna start to train your mind to say, okay, when I come and sit down on this chair, at this desk, or on this stool, or whatever you've got going on, when I come here, this is where work happens. This is where I focus and get things done. And then give yourself the freedom, right, to say, okay, well, when I step away from this area, from this work sort of a setup, right, then I'm free to interact. So the reason I'm saying all this is that we can train our minds, we can train ourselves, right, to start looking at things differently, right? The mind is very flexible. It is willing to carve out new pathways for how we treat things around us, right? How we treat a given situation, right? We can take a growth mindset and basically say, hey, yeah, this all sucks, but let me make the most of this particular situation. And this physical setup here, these boundaries, this is what I'm doing. And these boundaries may extend to sort of the virtual world as well, in terms of how you treat chat, how you treat social media interaction, all these things. Again, having the boundaries and knowing that, okay, I'm gonna leave one and go into the other. Trying to mix them all together, that's the recipe for disaster, in my opinion. I like the boundaries, and really that discipline frees me, right, to give all of myself to whatever I'm doing. If I'm gonna Twitter, I'm gonna Twitter hard, because I'm in that time block that says, yes, this is social media time. I'm gonna go all in. I'm gonna post the cat videos. I'm gonna do that, right? But once that time is over, now I'm back to whatever I'm supposed to be doing next according to my schedule, right? That discipline is freedom. I live by it.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting two aspects of boundaries that are super important, Johnny. One is the time and the other is the space. And finding a way to create time and space boundaries when I'm very fortunate. I have a dedicated office now. My dedicated office right now is actually larger than the living room, the entire living room we had when we were when my husband was in grad school. And I did not have a dedicated office. We had a very, very small place to live, but you're right that creating that space boundary in some way was important. So I had my desk, and my desk was in our living room. I got really sick of our living room. But when it was the end of the day, I would like put away everything. I would, this was many, many years ago. And so I would turn off my monitor and put away all the books, because forget ebooks, they weren't a thing yet. But like put away my books and just try to make it so that it was sort of out of sight, out of mind, so that I could focus on being with my family. Now, I also had a challenge because our daughter at the time, when my husband graduated, she had just turned 2. 2-year-olds do not understand boundaries. They just like, they don't, they're barely there, right? And so, I love, Johnny, you said your kids knock on the door. No, that was not even remotely a possibility. If she was not at daycare or somewhere outside the house, I didn't have the ability to create a boundary in terms of time with her. But having that mindfulness about finding ways to create boundaries, even when everything wanted to bleed into my time and my space to work, was so essential to enable me to both be a good parent and a good employee.
Fantastic.
Really good points. Just wanted to add that as a CTO, I'm working across 2 different time zones, very far apart, and so I'm getting bombarded by messages all the time throughout the day. So starting from the morning, my Slack is full of stuff because people in San Francisco have been working, and so then I need to reply to those. By the time the afternoon comes, everyone wakes up again in SF, so things continue. I usually even escalate by the time I'm going to sleep. So I think like I think the space boundary is really a valid point, but what I found helpful in my life is that what remote work brings me is a freedom to choose when I work and when I don't. And in my context, for example, when I'm trying to make a really clear separation between these two. However, it doesn't necessarily mean in time. So sometimes I can have things that I do in the evening, in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day. However, when I'm off, I'm off. And that's really important for me. So I put the do not disturb on all my devices. I don't check. I try to use the discipline and not check any notifications during that time. And so also consciously trying to create that type of space where I'm able to do that. So for example, in my work, oftentimes what happens is that sometimes day may be very hectic, starting early from the morning until the evening. And so I have a limited energy, and that gets drained really fast. So if I have 2 days like that consecutively, I am drained. I cannot work effectively after that. So at that point in time, I usually decide I'm going to take some time off. And so when I'm off, I'm not checking Slack, and I'm off for the team, and sort of creating that boundary to get my energy back and sort of get again back to a mode where I can work effectively.
Totally. No, and I think it's such an important point, that I hope anyone listening to this kind of takes away. I've certainly found this in my experience as a remote worker, that Johnny brings up, which is things get chaotic and things get more stressful when you try and mix too many things. And I think, this kind of discipline of, carving out specific time, where it's like, okay, this hour, period, this is when I'm going to be handling kind of email related things. And, later on today, I'm going to be focused for an hour on doing some research for this or that. And I think where things can get, very stressful, at least for me, is especially when that starts to then blend with personal things, it's like if my wife unwittingly doesn't realize, like, even though it looks like I'm, relaxed sitting on the sofa doing some work or something, she doesn't realize I'm in the midst of figuring out some enormously frustrating challenge on a spreadsheet or something. And, she can come through and be like, hey, can you quickly help me with this or that? And, all of a sudden you're like, it sends you crazy. So I think it's so important to be able to create these kind of really, nicely defined carve outs wherever possible. And as Johnny mentioned, you temper that with the realistic recognition that sometimes you're going to have to be flexible with those boundaries, and you're going to have to let those boundaries flex in and out a little bit. Where I'd love to kind of take the discussion next, Elisabeth, to kind of pick on you. You have a really incredible, story and experience, having been remote before we had all of these toys and all of these gadgets in lots of ways, many of which have been obviously game-changing in terms of enabling this and making productivity easier. But I'm curious if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, and then everyone else can chime in. What problems or challenges do you feel have remained unchanged regardless? Whether or not you're in dial-up in the middle of nowhere, or whether you're working with a incredible connection and Zoom in downtown San Francisco. What do you think has kind of remained the same regardless?
Yeah, thank you. I was on dial-up in the middle of nowhere, and oh boy, was that a challenge. But an awful lot of the challenges haven't necessarily changed. So video conferencing was absolutely not a thing at the time. And so we do have the advantage now that I can hop on a video conference with somebody and see their facial expressions, whereas I was only on the phone before. But on the flip side, not everybody has amazingly great broadband, and suddenly we've got kids trying to stream their classes on Zoom, two parents both trying to be on video conference. And so you may end up very much not on video and having to try to discern emotion over a phone call. So that hasn't necessarily completely gone away. Furthermore, the fact that you may feel disconnected from your team because being on a video conference for the entire workday just is not sustainable. It's not something that most people would be able to handle. And so there is that period of time where you've sent out an email, nobody's responded, and you're starting to wonder, did it go into a black hole? And you can't just get up and go ask somebody. And so that feeling of being disconnected, I think, hasn't hasn't necessarily changed, and finding ways, we are still human. 20 years may have passed since the time that I was doing dial-up in the middle of nowhere, but people are still people. Finding ways to connect on a human level with people who you just don't see unless you make an effort to see them is super difficult.
Definitely. I think that proactivity is so essential. And a point I'd love to kind of bring up and share, because this was one of my kind of key aha moments, courtesy of our last panel. One of our panelists, Brendan, who's at GitLab, talked about how actively GitLab discourages one-to-one communication wherever possible. And the reason for that is they don't want to kind of create this kind of ghost town impression, that I think we've all probably encountered, where you're on Slack or you're on email or whatever it is, and despite the fact that everyone has been busy or everyone has been doing work, if I just email Johnny or I just email Albert, or we're in a one-to-one chat on Slack, wherever it might be, it can be kind of a bizarre, and ultimately kind of disturbing might be a strong word, but kind of a disconcerting feeling, if you're on Slack or you're on email and you're like, like no one has engaged with me today, or no one's been, people haven't been as chatty as usual. Maybe something's wrong. Maybe, maybe someone's angry at me, or maybe something has gotten stuck in the process or something like that. And I think this kind of, proactive discouragement, whether it's from the bottom up, you're an individual contributor and you're trying to loop people in and keep conversations public where they can be, at least, is so important to remove this sense of isolation.
I think, yeah, something that I think the key word, in my opinion, now it's balance, right? How to find the balance, because something that it's also hard, it's sometimes I think we overuse communication through Slack or any other instant message, that we are having hard conversations, and writing definitely is not the best way to have hard conversations, because can go for a completely different direction, because there is no feeling, right? You cannot see body expressions, but also inviting people to have a meeting, to talk. So the challenge is, let's not create more meetings because we are remote, because this is not good. Let's try to keep it normal as possible, but you also need to be careful, because abusing of the writing communication, maybe you can get people hurt, right? And on top of that, the world is different, right? So I feel like it is getting a little bit harder having hard conversations on approach certain topics and keep people pragmatic, to make good decisions. So finding this balance, I think, I don't know, I think it's been my challenge in the last weeks. It's how to balance those things.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think that is a really important point there, Paolo, that you bring up, which is, let's make sure not to, kind of force every interaction into one particular channel or one particular medium. And I think Slack fatigue is a very real thing. And one of the best insights I've received that I now try and practice as much as I can is kind of thinking about the people you're working with and figuring out, what platforms might they be kind of most comfortable or receptive on. Some, maybe one of your more kind of introverted engineers might feel most comfortable, kind of having important discussions via email, while someone else might feel more comfortable on a phone call. They're a little weird on video, and sometimes others feel a lot more comfortable having the presence of video to be able to read into body language and see facial expressions. So as a manager and as a leader, I've certainly found that to be one of the kind of key takeaways, is getting really good at, kind of paying attention to that and not letting it happen by accident. Even if they come to you on, Slack, and perhaps this is a better conversation for a call, make that decision, be proactive to transition that, and to make sure you're addressing it effectively. I'm looking in the Q&A section here, and we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to pivot a little bit there, given that we've been a bit more organic and unstructured here, for better or for worse. But one question that I think is a really good one here is this idea of how do you build a strong remote team? Here being a remote culture. What things have you guys seen that have worked, or perhaps more importantly, what hasn't worked? when it comes to, building that culture, finding ways to build rapport, getting the productivity flowing, getting creativity and conversations moving along. What do you guys look for, and how do you think about building good remote culture?
If I may, no side conversations. I think that was previously mentioned very recently. Sort of communication should happen out in the open. It's better to over communicate than under communicate. If you think that that something is worth sort of broadcasting, or you don't know if some have heard or haven't heard, it's better to broadcast it again. Understand that the things like messaging is an asynchronous sort of a form of communication. When you Slack somebody or Microsoft Teams, chat, whatever you happen to be using, we're sort of trained to sort of try to respond immediately. It's okay to see a message come in and be like, you know what, I'm in the middle of something else right now. Okay, I'm going to reply to that. Right, you make a note of it. I'm going to reply to that when I'm done with whatever I'm working on right now. And those that are sort of trying to get in touch with you should understand that, okay, I'm going to be sending a message to this person. I should not expect to get a response back immediately. Matter of fact, if you can go find out what you're looking for, right, on your own, do a little bit of research so that you don't disturb unnecessarily. It might be best to actually go find out, right? Maybe through documentation, whatever you happen to be using, that whatever might happen to contain information that perhaps you would answer your question. It's better to go find these things out. I mean, you'd be surprised how many times where you could go look, but because so-and-so has worked on a particular project or has intimate knowledge of something else, you'll Slack them anyway, right? Because you're trying to get that quick answer so you can quickly move on. But the disruption that you might cause for somebody, right, who might be in the middle of some deep work is usually, I find that it's not worth it, right? So basically understanding that on a remote first culture, or if you're trying to build a remote friendly culture, asynchronicity is key, right? Don't have meetings if you can send like a long email, right? I'd rather sit there and read like a Tolstoy text, right? But get what I'm looking for, right? Rather than go spend an hour on a meeting whereby we could have just simply sent out an email and answered all my questions, right? So doing like basically being mindful of each other's time, I think is in this context, and even really when we move beyond this whole pandemic situation that we're in, is key to actually having a remote friendly team.
I totally agree. To just quickly jump in there too, to kind of riff on that further, I think that's something that is so often underestimated, and it's probably one of the big differences between a remote first organization and kind of a remote retrofit organization. Is the kind of people that are trying to retrofit a team into a remote dynamic, they retain a lot of those kind of synchronous things that might make a lot of sense in an office environment, but end up being a source of stress and inefficiency in a remote environment. And I think, whether you're a manager or just a member of a team, finding ways to encourage asynchronous collaboration and asynchronous work wherever possible means that your synchronous tasks can ultimately be a lot more effective. I'm super proud of the company I work for and the team I'm on, where we keep synchronous engagements to a very defined, set of things. Wednesday evenings, we have a call that aligns all time zones. Throughout the week, we have a handful of other things, but for the most part, we make sure to allow everyone to work on their own schedules, because we are dealing with that kind of, the chaos of being a startup, the differences in all the different time zones. And I think wherever, companies are looking to enforce, like, okay, we're going to have this conversation now, everyone jump on a call or Zoom, those things can be good. They can be culture building, but they can just as equally be culture destroying. And before I pass the mic to anyone else on the remote culture part too, I think such an underestimated part of good remote culture is, as simple as it sounds, like remembering that you've got people on the other end of any kind of communication system. I try and call myself out on this all the time, on Slack in particular, where it's so easy, to wake up in the morning, jump on Slack and immediately like ask somebody, like, oh, like what's going on with this? Or, have you got this? Or can you help me with that? Behaviors that if you were doing that face to face, you would be, a sociopath essentially. It's like I would have first come up to Johnny and be like, hey, good morning, how are you doing? You know, how's your day going so far? And, you know, before kind of just hammering him with, you know, requests or tasks or questions. So, you know, so I think that's always an important part of a good culture, is remembering, like, okay, first and foremost, we're people, and I'm not going to treat you like a robot. So yeah, curious for the rest of you guys. Johnny, owes some contributions there. You know, what have you guys seen that kind of makes your remote team build that rapport or work together with a more comfortable dynamic?
I think for us, it's also, I agree with Johnny said. I think this is definitely important, but creating channels for people speaking up, right? This was already hard when you had everyone in the office, but now creating channels where people feel safe to speak up, to talk about problems, to talk about conflicts that they are having, it is getting much harder because you don't have this physical presence anymore. So, and with this amount of change that are being introduced, so for us, it's been, I think people feel safe enough to speak up about the problems and about the actions that we are taking that it's actually not helping. So being very open to feedback, I think it's also one of the ingredients that you should increase the attention when you are remote, right? Making sure that we have safe rooms for people to speak up.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. It's a really excellent point. So we have 5 minutes left here. So I think we can kind of come to a comfortable finish here, but I would love to kind of put everyone on the spot, you know, as kind of your parting thoughts here. You know, if you were talking to anybody, whether they're veteran remote workers or brand new to this and figuring it out, what would be the one thing you would like to share, you know, with somebody that's looking to do right by this, whether as an individual contributor or as a manager? You know, what's the one thing that you feel like you've either figured out or you got wrong in the past that they should avoid? What comes to mind as far as like your life advice as a remote citizen? Albert, if you don't mind, I'm gonna throw you on the spot here. If you're comfortable leading off here, feel free to push it back on me.
Cool. In my context, we are working across time zones, so a lot of things are about taking others into account, being considerate, and especially those working on the other end. And being a startup, we try to move as fast as possible, and we try to also hire people who have this inner sense of urgency and drive of driving things forward, because in a startup, everyone needs to be pushing everything forward as much as possible. So what we try to do is also be mindful of what's happening on the other end, and then sometimes making a few extra steps to over communicate something, or maybe spend a few minutes more on some tasks in order to turn the wheel sort of faster, rather than having the other end wait for another day or so. So that's maybe one thing that is something that we try to be mindful of.
I love that tip. Certainly something I found most exciting about working with different time zones is if you can kind of get into that rhythm where it's like, okay, I'm going to bed, pass the baton, the work keeps moving, you know, and when I'm awake, you know, some of the tasks will be solved and there'll be new things to do. And I think being mindful of that is a great way to maximize the, you know, all the good things that can come from that.
Ask for help. I think you are not alone on this, right? So we don't need to be heroes. We don't need to know. It's fine to say, I don't know, I need help. Because I think when we are asking for help, actually we are asking for people invest in our success, right? So asking for help when you feel that you are stuck or you are struggling, I think this is one of the most important things to do in these days.
I completely agree. I can completely agree. It's a conversation I've had with many different remote workers in the, you know, across the last few years in particular, where it's so easy to isolate yourself and to get kind of stuck on a problem, or to, you know, not expose yourself to feedback or inputs from other people and send yourself a little crazy. So I think that's such a great bit of advice, you know, is be very conscious of that, reality, and the fact that you are going to need to seek help, and you're going to have to ask for it, because it's not going to organically happen. Whether you're an individual, I think developing the bravery to do that, and perhaps even more important as a manager, building that culture and making it, not just something that's okay, but encouraged, to reach out to the team and get that input. So crucial, for sure.
So I'll jump in. I remember when I first started working remotely, I put a huge amount of pressure on myself, and I was seeing on Twitter, like, somebody somewhere was asking, well, if I can't observe my employees, how do I know they're working? And so if I could say one thing, it's just assume everybody is doing the very, very best they can. And so I guess my advice is to managers to just chill out. And not, for managers who would rely on their ability to see effort in the office, this is going to feel incredibly uncomfortable, but outcome is more important than effort. And everybody is doing the very best they can under incredibly difficult circumstances. As I think Johnny said at the beginning, this isn't just working from home, it's working from home in a pandemic. And so assume everybody is doing the very, very best they can, and don't try to figure out how you can tell whether or not your employees are working.
Totally. It's a great way to really capture that. It's this idea, like, focus on the outcome, not on the effort, and I think we should all tattoo that on our arms.
So if I may, I'm going to be very prescriptive here with sort of how I would sort of encourage folks to sort of really work on themselves, right, before they expect the world to sort of help solve problems for them, right? So I think we expect sort of employers to change everything or to be accepting of the way things are right now. We expect, other people to understand that, yes, we're things are not normal and whatnot, but there are some things you can do during this time to sort of improve yourself as well. So I'm going to be very prescriptive here. So one, if you don't know how to sort of manage, everybody thinks they know how to manage their to-do list or their tasks, whatnot. I used to think so. After sort of lots of searching, lots of reading and whatnot, I realized I really didn't know what I was doing. One of the biggest sort of sources of insight for me was reading David Allen's Getting Things Done. Like, if you've read this book before, if you heard about it and never read it, go back. I mean, it's at this point, it's probably like a dozen years old, but it has changed the way I approach sort of how I organize my workload. So Getting Things Done by David Allen. Deep Work by Cal Newport. If you want to understand why you need time away from all distractions to get things done, read that book. Trust me, it'll convince you. Next up, if you like procrastinating, like most of us like to do every now and then, if you need a kick in the pants to kick that habit, read Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. Also along the same lines, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Not The Art of War, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. These books will give you kind of a kick in the pants and help you sort of get your mind right to really tackle sort of your day-to-day. And the last piece of advice is, if you haven't, you don't need any fancy tools to manage your life, right? You can get a to-do app, whatever it is. They have plenty of them these days, but your calendar, love it. Put everything you need on there, even things that come up, things that are not scheduled. Learn to live and love by your calendar. Like my family, everybody I interact with, they already know. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist, because I'm trying to manage my life and there's just too much going on. Like, I need somewhere that tells me, hey, this is what you're doing next, right? Because I need to be able to focus on any one thing I'm working on and basically push everything else out, right? So learn to love your calendar, live by it. And that's my one piece of advice I'd give you. Take anything from everything I've said here, learn to live by your calendar.